Hello. It looks like Saturdays are going to be the days that I upload videos. So I wanted to continue a little further discussion on this book that I am reading that I highly recommend if you want or are interested in really knowing what's going on today, because the progressives, these progressive Democrats, this has been in the works for a very long time. They are really good at playing the long game. But this is the book right here, The Authoritarians. Okay, so I'm gonna just go over some things. We're gonna be discussing Roosevelt and Hoover as well, but primarily Roosevelt and his New Deal. So when the Supreme Court reversed its decision in April of 1937 to strike down the New Deal, it ushered in a revolutionary reinterpretation of the Constitution to negate its limits on power. Because keep in mind, they, as we're seeing now with this administration, the Constitution has limits. It limits power, and they hate that. So Roosevelt, when this got struck down, basically achieved unlimited government. They want to blame socialists primarily, want to blame everything on capitalism. They believe capitalism is an evil thing. Even though capitalism has lifted more people out of abject poverty than any other financial system in the world. It's still fairly young, but free market, which we don't really practice, Eisenhower sought to regulate beyond comprehension. And the Great Depression did not come from the failings of capitalism. It actually came from the actions, domestic and foreign, policies that caused credit to evaporate, import and export markets to collapse, and banks to close. One, the European governments refused to repay over 10 million in war loans given by us, US, to help finance World War I. The Smoot-Hawley Tariff Act, the highest tariffs in US history, covering 3,218 imported goods, triggered European retaliatory tariffs that led to the spiral that deprived both sides of the Atlantic of needed goods, and this drove all manner of consumer goods beyond affordability. Lending policies of the Federal Reserve, created by the Wilson administration in 1913, Wilson and Roosevelt never embarked on policies to liberate the besieged market from the regulatory constraints of lower tariffs and taxes. Both were hell-bent by replacing the private sector with government control. This is what happens when you allow government to control aspects of, goods and services, corporations, regulations, things like that. They maintain the highest and most extensive regime of tariffs in American history. They could have repealed the Smoot-Hawley tariffs and renegotiated repeals of foreign tariffs, but instead of that, and instead of raising individual taxes and corporate taxes, they could have lowered them, but they did not. They could have allowed the government to operate unimpeded. Had they done so, the enormous loss of individual liberty and sovereignty attendant to unlimited growth of the federal government may have been avoided. They didn't want that. The New Deal banished jurisprudence doctrines that limited the power of the federal government, established a large, extra-constitutional, permanent bureaucratic oligarchy in the form of an authoritarian administration state unaccountable to the people. So I want you to think about what Biden's trying to do right now by enacting OSHA. Now, OSHA is necessary. I am not saying that OSHA is an unnecessary regulatory agency. It keeps us safe. It gives us guidance on how to properly dispose of certain chemicals, things like that. Lets us know if they're toxic, to human beings. It's an essential organization. But to enact them with coming up and mandating things so people can work is outside of their purview. But the government knows that they can't mandate. They can highly recommend and they can do an executive order, but the Constitution limits their powers. So they're using these bureaucratic agencies to do their work for them. That was the whole purpose of these things being set up. The sovereignty of the people has been given away to the state, and the bureaucratic enslavement of individuals and small businesses became the order of the day. Progressives of the 19th century harbored disdain of the constitutional limits on government power, and they applauded the German model for their efficiency in pursuit of the common good. We've all heard that a lot lately, right? Anybody that has studied history, I just recently, over the past year and a half, got involved, knows that the greatest of human atrocities that the 20th century has ever seen were all done in the name of the common good. So to get around the constraints of the Constitution, they created the administrative state, a government external to and largely independent of the Constitution's three branches. Under the Hegelian state, the common good is defined by state experts. In layman's terms, they rely on these so-called experts to redirect human action away from privately chosen endeavors toward endeavors that advance the common good. So I want you to think about our individual rights as citizens of the United States and our ability to assess our own risk, okay? And then think about how all the rhetoric that we have heard from these so-called experts, it's like, for the greater good, you don't want to kill grandma, you don't want to do this, turning fearful citizens, you know, those whose frontal lobes are completely shut down because they just aren't thinking, they're turning them against people who are like, you know what, I'm good. You know, I don't feel I need to wear a mask. I don't feel I need to get that, you know, like I'm good. I know my own risk and I'm willing to take that risk. Which is what this country is all about, right? Assessing and taking responsibility for your life and your own risks and not imposing your will on others. Those of us that believe like in individual rights, we don't try to push our agenda or our beliefs onto other people, but there are a lot of people out there. We'll call these new progressives religious zealots because they're the first one to protest, use my pronouns, do this, do that for the greater good, don't kill grandma, are the same people. Majority of them are probably not God-fearing people. They probably don't go to church. Maybe they're, I'm agnostic. So I'm just like, but I'm not going to push my beliefs off on you. And they want to. They absolutely want to. They want you to do as you're told. I lost a lot of friends over the past year and a half because I had questions. I had a lot of questions. And I was basically told to shut up and do what you're told. This might have worked when I was still using drugs, but because I didn't really care much about anything other than getting more drugs. But prior to that, when I was in my early 20s, before any of these things happened, I was a fairly stubborn individual. I still am. And not in the aspect of stubborn being selfish, but stubborn being, why should I do what I'm told? What are the risks? What are the benefits? You know, I had questions. I critically thought. I still do now. Probably more so. So we're going to do a little more discussions about this book. That's about as far as I got into it. Well, actually, I did get a little bit further because right now they're trying to force this. And here is the problem. In the chapter in Authoritarians named The Dismantlement of the Constitutional Barriers, there are several here. So if you want to appreciate how far the governing power has departed from its constitutional moorings, it is important to examine those moorings in some detail at each point of departure. The powers assumed by the administrative state are vast and indeed violate the plain and intended meaning of the Constitution. So, 1, regulations are laws enacted without the consent of the governed. We're the consent of the governed. Regulatory agencies and bureaus are ruled by individual commissioners, FDA, EPA, or a slate of commissioners, FTC, FCC, who are appointed by the president and usually approved by Congress. The agency and bureau heads are not elected. They are not the product of elected representatives. By contrast, the Constitution requires all laws be created by Congress, which is, of course, elected by the people. So we elect our representatives. John Locke, that no judgment could exist unless it was based in the first instance on the consent of the governed. The essential principle is that no one has the right to govern another without the other's consent, individual liberties and rights. The principle defines the difference between freedom and slavery. A free people consent to limitations on their freedom. Slaves do not. In this sense, administrative law is retrograde. It is a form of enslavement because it is imposed on the governed without their consent, either directly by their individual consent or indirectly by their elected representatives' consent. The fabric of the American people, so this is in Federalist number 22, Hamilton put it this way: the fabric of the American empire ought to rest on the solid basis of the consent of the people. The genius of the Republican liberties seems to demand on one side not only that all power should be derived from the people, but that those entrusted with it should be kept in independence on the people by a short duration of their appointments. In Federalist number 39, Madison related that a Republican form of government would devolve into tyranny if powers originally derived from the consent of the governed were delegated to a favored class unaccountable to the people. He there spoke prophetically because the administrative state is that very thing. A favored class of people touted to be experts, and that class does not indeed govern like tyrannical nobles. Those who govern justly are fiduciaries of the people. They are trustees who must account to the people for their official actions. In the administrative state, no such accountability exists. The unelected who create administrative regulations do not stand for election, and so if they enact a regulation that is contrary to the will of the people or in deprivation of individual right, they suffer no consequence. Moreover, unlike elected representatives, if they govern corruptly, they cannot be removed from office by vote of the people. While they may suffer prosecution for their offenses, that is itself an action initiated not by the elected representatives of people, but instead by an unelected administration. Example, the United States attorneys or attorney general, themselves appointed, not elected. This feature of no accountability provides decision makers in the agencies tremendous power to enforce their will in ways that would be roundly rejected by the public. In the taking of private property, the destruction of entire businesses, the stifling of vital health information, all without ever having to account for those actions to the American people. Legislators often favor delegating broad powers to agencies precisely because those legislators do not want to be held accountable by their constituents for their actions they desire, but that have draconian consequences, such as the closing of plants, costly compliance and satisfaction of compulsory environmental regulations, or the censorship of information acting, freedom of choice, health, and life. The thing is they have laws now, don't they? Because we repeatedly saw governors, elected officials close down businesses and deprive people of their right to life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness, whether it be through their jobs, providing for their families, all of those things. It was all illegal. We should have never complied, but we did. 14 days to slow the spread. Number two, the administrative state exists in breach of the non-delegation doctrine. The powers wielded by administrative agencies are derived initially from their enabling statutes. Those delegations include not only congressional power to make law, but also in an act of usurpation by Congress, the powers of executive and the judiciary. The Constitution vests legislative, executive, and judicial powers exclusively in the respective branches of the federal government and only in those. It does not authorize redelegation of powers to entities outside of its branches. So what you're doing, Biden, is illegal. This concept of reserved powers within the constitutional branches is called the non-delegation doctrine and was explained by John Locke in his second treatise on government and therefore adopted by the founding fathers. At root, it defends the sovereignty of the people and is a derivative of the concept that just laws depend on the consent of the governed. The people have not consented to invest constitutional powers of governance in any entities other than the three constitutional branches of government to which they have consented. This delegation to agencies and bureaus of those powers creates a fundamental illegitimacy problem. Locke explains, the legislative cannot transfer the power of making laws to any other hands. So that's what Biden is doing. Let me read that again. The legislative, although his is executive, cannot transfer the power of making laws to other hands. It's what he's doing with OSHA. For it being but a delegated power from the people, they who have it cannot pass it over to others. That is because the people alone can appoint the form of commonwealth. And when the people have said, we will submit to rules and be governed by laws made by such men, nobody else can say other men shall make laws for them, nor can the people be bound by any laws, but such are enacted by those whom we have chosen. We didn't choose the people that run OSHA. We chose the president. We didn't choose all of these regulatory agencies' appointees. We chose our representatives in Congress. Recognizing the direct line of authority comes from the people by their consent. We don't consent, Biden, to the specific repositories of powers in the Constitution. It is thus literally unconstitutional for those who control those repositories to transfer any part of that power to others to which the people have not given their consent. We don't consent. So if you're like me and you believe that people should have the freedom to choose, please make a comment. Make a comment in this video. Ask questions, ask me questions. Let's get involved. Let's have a conversation, because what is happening right now, because of these people that have been very, very patient at playing the long game, they have overrun our educational system. They overrun our entertainment industry. I mean, I'm having a hard time even watching newer shows now because it's all full of stuff. Yeah. But if you're fed up, sound off. Tell me what you're fed up about. Let's have a conversation, because everything that's going on right now is so beyond illegal. And I'm so proud of the people at Southwest and all these other people that are standing up. We don't hear anything about all these countries like Italy and Romania and Bucharest and France all protesting because they don't want the American people to see that. We don't hear about it on the news because they don't want the American people to see it. I think the only news organization that actually has reported on what's going on in Australia is Fox News. And I don't even watch Fox News, at least not consistently. But I do know that Tucker Carlson was the only person to do a show on what's going on in Australia. But the only way that this is going to end is by civil disobedience. I realize that it's going to be difficult to, these mandates. There are more people out there that feel like we do. You need to start talking to the people that you work with, especially if you work in a company with over 100 employees. It's not hard to be a little, covert and just ask general questions, find out the people that have already gotten the vaccine and people that haven't gotten it, because, those that have already gotten it, they want it. They got it already. Those that haven't gotten it, we don't want it. Right. There are more of us than you think. So start talking to your coworkers, because there's been many instances that I've heard of so far where they enacted this mandate and then a mass of employees walked off and they quickly reversed their course. No one wants to work right now. And it would cost a company a ton of money if they were going to lose more than half of their employees. If they mandate, it would cost them a lot more money. First off, to hire new people, and good luck with that if you can find them, and then training those people. And those people are probably going to want more money than the people that you're letting go. Like, we need to stand up, start rallying people. that's all I've got to say. Thanks for listening. I look forward to any of your questions or comments. Have a great day.